Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. I'm your host, Connor, and with me for the first time, Apostolic Majesty. He is a YouTuber that focuses on history as well as mythology, I would say, in the best way to describe it, regarding his interest in Tolkien and such. Welcome, AM.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me on, Connor.
No problem. And with me back is Charles Coulombe, the great historian, writer of many books, including Star-Spangled Crown, The Pope's Legion, Puritan's Empire, just a few of my favorites. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you. Great to be back.
Yeah. So we're here to talk about the Rings of Power, arguably the most destructive name of a TV series for an adaptation of Lord of the Rings. It is doing exactly what it says in the name. So what do you guys think about just the name?
Apostolic, you want to go first, or shall I take a slack at it?
No, by all means, go first, Charles.
Oh, thanks so much.
Word from our affiliate, Bishop Sheen Rosaries. You've probably worn through the chain of your cheap plastic rosary. Other rosaries simply can't stand up to the wear and tear of everyday life. Bishop Sheen rosaries are made of solid metal beads and paracord to withstand any condition, and are backed with a lifetime warranty. Upgrade your rosary to a Bishop Sheen rosary made to fit your lifestyle, or buy one for a friend. Each rosary sold supplies 2 weeks of food for a school kid in Uganda. You use the exclusive link down below to help support our efforts here at Plotlines. The link will take you to sheenrosaries.com. Be sure to use the code Plotlines10.
To be honest with you, it's almost as if they so didn't get the point that it becomes satire. I mean, this many years ago, when Lord of the Rings came out, the Harvard Lampoon came out with a parody called Bored of the Rings, which is very, very funny. I mean, if you revere the Lord of the Rings, you won't find it that funny, but I found it hysterical. You get to a point to where if you completely misunderstand what something's about, and you really feel the need to appropriate it, you will turn it into a parody. And calling it the Rings of Power, it's almost as if they willfully don't get what Tolkien was about. And, honestly, I can see that, because the truth of the matter is, in my humble opinion, if the professor were around today, he would be canceled quicker than a wink. But the problem is, there's a lot of the old do-re-mi in the old professor's work, and that speaks even louder than ideology. So modern media creatures who are trying to work with his stuff are stuck with two problems. One, from their standpoint, it's all awful. His ethics, his standards, his values, they're horrible. But on the other hand, there's a whole lot of the old do-re-mi to be squeezed out of it. What do you do in a setup like that? Well, what you end up doing is creating something in your own image. And if what your own image is fairly foul, well, that's what you'll make. As a sort of parallel, if you will, to this, I'd cite much as I hate to say it, because I knew her and I didn't know him, but a somewhat lesser fantasy writer, though still very good in my humble estimation, Madeleine L'Engle, whose work, A Wrinkle in Time, has gone through several adaptations, increasingly bad. The first was done while she was still alive, was done by Disney as a TV movie. And at the time, it was noticed, it was about 2005 or something like that, 2004, she was still alive. It was noticed that most of the Christian stuff had been taken out, though a bit was left. And they asked her what she thought after it was broadcast. And she said, well, I thought it would be lousy. And it was. That was her comment. And I saw it and I agreed with it. All right. Fade in, fade out. 3 years ago, Disney comes out with this really woke version of Wrinkle in Time. And it was bad. It was so bad. It was jaw-droppingly bad. It was really horrible. I literally ran out of the theater when it was done. I ran home and I saw the old TV movie version. And it was so much better. It was just so much better than what I had just seen in the movie theater. So here's my prediction. For those of us who are Tolkien purists and have found it difficult to separate the Jackson films from the Tolkien writings, which, to be brutally frank, I do. I knew that if I wanted to enjoy the Jackson films, I'd have to set aside the movie in my head and pretend they had nothing to do with Lord of the Rings. And if you do that, they're great. But I predict that Rings of Power will do one important thing. It will send sales of those movies skyrocketing as people run to them, shrieking the way I did from Disney's latest version of Wrinkle in Time. Because you see, everything about it is so egregious. I mean, they've got, as I was thinking about it, I thought, let's take a step further. Let's have a sexy orc wife as a character who changes sides. We'll see the problem, of course. Let's pretend we did that. Or forget the sexy orc wife. Bobby, the friendly orc, who decides that there's a problem with serving Sauron and he wants to become a good guy. Well, that blows the whole premise. It destroys everything about the question of evil. Honestly, and then I'll shut up and I'll yield the floor. You can almost see between Jackson's Lord of the Rings and this stuff, Jackson's Hobbit as a midway in the decline. You know, definitely the hot romance between a dwarf and an elf woman, that's something only a modern woke person could pull out. It just, I mean, and cramming one film into 3 was kind of a miracle in itself, I guess. Anyhow, I guess what I'm trying to say is that all this thing is a run for the money. And the best way to deal with it is ignore it.
Yes, that's rather interesting because I had been putting out among my my paltry number of followers, although very much appreciated, that I was just going to ignore this. Just on the title itself of The Rings of Power, my first feelings were a little bit more innocuous than that. I saw Of the Rings of Power and I thought, well, very sort of unimaginatively, this is just the final book of the 1977 The Silmarillion. And I thought this was the part of the Silmarillion which they've been allowed to adapt, some 20 pages. And then I discovered later that they didn't have the rights to the Silmarillion. They only had the rights to the appendices of The Lord of the Rings. But more than that, I thought, okay, so why are they calling it The Rings of Power? And I thought this was cynical. I thought this was just an attempt to link the marketing of the Jackson films. I mean, this is essentially The Hobbit. You've already alluded to it with The Hobbit. The Hobbit could have been something far less epic. It could have been a single film. It could have been 2 films. In fact, I believe it was supposed to be 2 films with Del Toro rather than Jackson directing it. But of course, they took The Hobbit and they couldn't leave well enough alone, and they made it into a Lord of the Rings prequel trilogy. So I thought, upon seeing the rather absurd title video of The Rings of Power, that this was simply going to be a continuation of that. This was going to be pandering to the Lord of the Rings viewers of obviously the Jackson films. But then I saw the images from Vanity Fair and I saw the trailer. And what I found utterly remarkable, I was completely wrong. The marketing would sort of lend itself to that notion that this was just a cynical tie into the Jackson films in order to, make vast amounts of money. But I was actually shocked by the level of subversion and the amount of creative freedom that the showrunners had taken the very limited amount of source material, and they had invented so much. I was really quite startled. And of course, as you alluded to, Charles, the wokery. I think the main dividing line between you and me is that I haven't watched any sort of Disney adaptation of anything for the last 10 years.
You haven't missed much. I would only say the only one I really liked was Christopher Robin.
No, I haven't seen that. I'll probably have to see that now in your recommendation. But yes, so what are the implications here? I mean, even just in the casting, what's her name? The actress who's playing Galadriel, Morfydd Clark. First of all, she looks nothing like Cate Blanchett if you're going to link it to those Jackson films. But other than that, I couldn't help but feel that they've decided to take the character of Galadriel and turn her into some sort of pseudo Joan of Arc, which is rather strange, but there you are. I'm not sure how this relates to, and again, in addition to not possessing the rights to the Silmarillion, they don't possess the rights to the Unfinished Tales and any of the extended writings on Galadriel. So all of this, as far as I'm concerned, is going to be an invention, which is quite startling. So we're going to have a lot of diverse, interesting, complex characters, all with very soap drama-esque plot lines, fitted into the Second Age, which is now, as far as I'm aware, going to be condensed from 3,000 years into about, I don't know, 5 years, a decade. I never conceived that all of these things would actually happen. I thought they would, at least do something intelligent, like start it off with the fall of Numenor, go on and, we would follow characters like Elendil and Gil-galad, and it will culminate with the War of the Last Alliance and the defeating of Sauron the first time. But no, it seems that during the entire Second Age, from what I gather, in this condensed drama, and it's not going to focus on that. Instead, you're going to have all of these, I don't know, human interest stories. Again, your possible scenario, Charles, of having an orc who switches sides or gets into a romance, let's say, with an elf. Why not? Why not?
Why not? Why not? I mean, how about the 8th Nazgul, or the 10th Nazgul, who has a change of heart?
They already did that in a video game series, basically.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Why not? Because you all know that evil and good are fluid, and that it's not entirely possible to give yourself over to one or the other, and that really there's no difference between them.
Yeah, just so for you guys to know, is like, so there was a concept, there was a game. I'm not sure if any of you have played games like these, but I can't remember.
I've watched my nephews play World of Warcraft. That's about it. Yeah.
But there was a game, there's a Lord of the Rings game. It was supposed to be sort of like, very violent and very, it's supposed to be just run around, attack, also enslave like orcs and stuff. It's kind of crazy. And then at one point they make their own ring, and it's basically this man of Gondor is attached to the soul of Celebrimbor, the elf smith.
Help me. Okay. I'll tell you, the professor got while the getting was good. I shudder to think what he would think if he were around now.
Yeah, I think also sort of what I really thought about regarding Rings of Power, sort of just watching like Twitter for over the last week, is just like, the Rings of Power are supposed to corrupt us all, and they are making, they are in a sense not like corrupting like Tolkien fans that are like, that want Tolkien to be represented as he should be, but it's just creating this almost false like anger and conflict amongst sort of normies, I guess you could say.
Well, interestingly, I think that is actually rather apt. We have, if I'm going to make the explicit explicit analogy, you could say the Tolkien purists out there have been afforded a couple of rings of power, and now there has been this ring of deceit which has been created in spite of all that, and all we have to do in response is simply take our rings off to prevent being corrupted by it.
Well, not to get too far afield, but a couple of I don't want to be too specific, but a couple of Tolkien literary societies with which I was associated for many, many years have gone almost completely woke. And it's heartbreaking to watch. The annual conference of one of them, they had things like degenderizing Gondor and stuff. I mean, it just, what are you talking about? And of course, if you have a problem with it, then you're intolerant and have to be canceled.
Yes, definitely.
Intolerance will not be tolerated. And it's funny, people can actually say that to you with a straight face and not realize how it sounds and how they look.
Just the funny thing about the word tolerance is the origin of the word comes from like tolerating like something evil. Yeah. So if they want tolerance, because they want tolerance for them, because they're evil, and they don't want tolerance for good.
No, they don't. And the thing I attempt to explain to one person of this sort, that when I first became interested in Tolkien back in, well, I hate to say what year, but it was 73. At that time, the people who were really behind it, who were really put it together, were very countercultural types. That means hippies for those members of our audience who are too young to understand what I mean. But that didn't matter. It was a very tolerant sort of thing, literally, in the sense the people of very diverse interests and backgrounds were united by a mutual love of the work.
Well, that's the key, Charles. You have to actually love the work.
Yeah. Whereas rather than trying to capture it for an agenda of your own, I mean, if there's to be an agenda, I think it should be the agenda of the author. Call me old-fashioned, but Tolkien was not, as he really emphasized with his hatred of oh gosh, what's the word I'm thinking of? Like Bunyan. Old age at work. I can't think of the word. Like Pilgrim's Progress is a fine example of not a parable. Help me out here. You guys know what I'm talking about. I'm telling you. Anyway, I can't think of the word, and it's a simple one, and I feel stupid, but it's all right. Suffice to say that he hated using literary work as message work. Allegory, that's the word.
I don't know why I couldn't come with that either. I was having trouble too.
Apostolic Majesty, you failed me. I was hoping you would rescue me, but no, you let me fumble around.
No. When someone says come up with a word which is incredibly simple, my mind immediately goes blank. Anything which is conceived of as simple, I cannot. I'm not saying that to big myself up. It's just I'm in the habit of using very ostentatious and pretentious words. Therefore, I'm incapable of using words to communicate ideas in a concise manner.
Well, all right, fine. Then you're both excused. But the word I wanted was allegory. Tolkien claimed to hate allegory. So he would have been the last person to write a quote-unquote message book. Nevertheless, because, as he himself admitted, any book partakes of the nature of its author. And he himself, being a Catholic, and a Christian, the Lord of the Rings reflected its author, and he was fine with that. I would say, in fact, and you can both have at me on this if you like, but the reason I think why Lord of the Rings is so powerful, amongst other reasons, but the biggest, I think, is that it is really a meditation on the interaction of grace and free will. And we have the sense that in the real world, things actually do work that way. I say the sense, unconsciously. And there are times in Lord of the Rings where this is really brought up. There are 3 or 4 times, not often, because he doesn't hit you over the head with it. But one of the most obvious is when Gandalf tells Frodo that Bilbo was intended to find the ring and not by its maker. That's a very subtle hint at providence. Or when during the in one of the appendices, he's explaining how he ran into Thorin Oakenshield Bree and found out about the plot to get rid of the dragon. And then he said, well, you're going to do that. You're going to really need a hobbit for your burglar. And so that was what sent them off to the Shire to find one. Well, he then goes on a long laundry list of all the terrible things that would have happened had Smaug not been destroyed, but had been around for Sauron to use during the War of the Ring. And the laundry list ends with Dragonfire and Lorien, and perhaps Snow Queen and Gondor. But none of that happened because none of that occurred because I happened to run across Thorin Oakenshield one night at the inn at Bree. A chance meeting, as we say in Middle-earth. I remember the first time I read that, it sent a real thrill down my spine. Because if you think back to your own life, all of our lives, they're filled with that sort of chance meeting. And that.
Charles, do you think that it hit you so much because you would probably be a great Gandalf?
Oh, gosh, I'd be more of a Radagast. No, I don't think I'd be much of a Gandalf. I don't have either the wisdom or the stamina, but Radagast, maybe. Although I'm not that much into animals either. Perhaps if you've got a wizard, one of the two that just fly out of the story and never heard of again. But honestly, it did send a thrill down my spine because even as a boy, I knew that's how life really works. And of course, the ultimate example of this is the way Gollum saves the world. It's Gollum who accomplishes the quest for his own evil reasons without any benefit to himself spiritually, God knows, or physically. And yet he saves the day. And he's there to save the day because Frodo spared his life out of pity.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely the sort of the message of Lord of the Rings, and I think Charles, you've summed it up very well. And you don't require anyone to prompt you to do so. But I think one thing that AM mentioned earlier that I think we should come back to, because I think that sort of the line between the Jackson films as well as this new Rings of Power show is really Galadriel. If you look at her, though, I actually think that when you look at the face of the actress of at least in one of the shots of the trailer, I thought she did kind of remind me of Cate Blanchett a little bit.
I don't know, Connor. Seeing that shot in the trailer of her climbing that mountain, it really put me in the mind of Cate Blanchett during Fellowship of the Ring.
Well, maybe not. I don't think in like character. I just thought face wise, but I could be wrong. But just her storyline is like, it's personified in the difference between how she's treated in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. You know, she comes in and like fights Sauron single-handedly in the Hobbit trilogy, and she comes to save Gandalf, and you know, it seems like Gandalf and her are, you know, almost having a little bit of romance, and you're just like, where the heck is Celeborn?
Yes.
And that's the question for this show too, is where the heck is Celeborn? He's the one that would be doing any of this stuff. She would just be accompanying him. And even though she was very like ambitious, she wasn't one to like, to be the, you know, she wasn't the one to climb a mountain because, oh, I have to climb the mountain to get to the other side. It's, I'm going to get there eventually and rule my own kingdom. And then she has to learn to give up that kingdom.
Ah, yes, but Tolkien here is detailing what you consider archetypes, gender archetypes, and how different genders use power. And I think that is a very outmoded way of thinking for our contemporary age. And we need to adopt, you know, again, a form of female empowerment, which basically just makes women into men. I think that's far more empowering than seeing men and women as particularly different and exuding powers or, you know, anything, their personalities in different ways. No, I think it has to all be just women have to be men. There's no other aspiration. There's nothing they can aspire to on their own. They have to just be men. They have to wear armor. They have to go into charge into battle on a horse with a lance. There is no other way of women exerting power. I mean, honestly.
Well, we know that women in this new paradigm, women are obviously worthless unless they're men. So there you go. It's not a problem. I think that to be true to itself, this thing would have Galadriel take the ring and become the terrible battle queen that she spoke of becoming if she did that.
Yes, but she wouldn't become the terrible battle queen. It'll be an empowering moment for her. It won't be cast as some sort of a deplorable thing on her part. No, she'll be.
No.
She'll be taking the ring in order to dismantle the patriarchy and dismantle institutional racism, I'm sure.
That's right. All that.
Definitely.
The older I get, the more I hate this garbage. I really do. And it wouldn't be so bad if it was just a lie or just all pervasive. It's the fact that it's an all pervasive lie that makes it very annoying. And you know, the funny thing about it, going back to the professor for a moment, Tolkien had something none of these people have. He had a real life. He really, really had a real life. Between his childhood adventures and privations, his education, his experience in the Great War, his courtship of his wife, his balancing academia and his faith and his family life. In all these things, he had a much more real life than these creatures who are attempting to Shanghai his work.
Yeah, I also think sort of we also need to look at, you know, who the creators of this terrible work are. So AM, we were talking before, before we started about them. Would you like to give us the rundown about these two, or the two creators?
Yes, one is called, I think, A.G. Payne. The other one, whose name I was able to recall earlier, but since I've forgotten. But the point is, both of these are the showrunners, I believe, for the series. And I think the series is guaranteed for something like 5 seasons or something ridiculous, because the amount of money that Amazon has invested in all of this. But the only experience, the credited writers, they have very, very little in the way of actual sort of tangible experience, apart from being associated with a terrible Star Trek film. And so, of course, Jeff Bezos, and by that I mean modern Star Trek. I think it was Star Trek Into Darkness, the film where Spock beats up Khan in a fistfight. Those are the writers who are going to run this entire thing. And not only that, but they have the responsibility of having to augment the tiny amount of material which they actually have the rights for, and turning this into, again, what does Jeff Bezos want? He doesn't want Lord of the Rings. He wants Game of Thrones wearing the skin suit of Lord of the Rings. But even then, I mean, in fairness to George R.R. Martin, who are the showrunners for that series, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, they had 5 books to work off in order to adapt that series properly, even though they went away from the source material after the 3rd book. And you could say what you want about those series, but they had universal acclaim, and they became a pop culture sensation. I just can't imagine taking very inexperienced writers with any project. It doesn't have to be Lord of the Rings, giving them such a skeleton of information to work with, and extrapolating from that something which is supposed to reach the heights of not Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, and expecting it to work. I mean, the sort of mind boggles the amount of faith and resources that have been invested in this. And I think what sort of astonished me more than that is that there is a group of Lord of the Rings fans out there, I don't mean to sound harsh, who will see anything so long as it's not blatantly offensive. If they are able to see, for example, Numenor visually represented, if they're able to see Middle-earth in the Second Age, they will go and see it, even if it's not very well written, even if it's just mediocre, they will go and see it. So what I found remarkable about this trailer and these images we're seeing about, Vanity Fair, is that they seem to be deliberately goading the audience to hate the series. Even then, I was alluding to the fact that bringing the Rings of Power was a cynical marketing ploy to rely on that Peter Jackson audience, not the book readers, not definitely people who haven't read the Silmarillion or any of the other works, who are familiar with the First and Second Ages. So I find it fascinating that Amazon has decided to invest so much money, give it to people who have no experience, and the first tactic on their part is to deliberately alienate even the casual fans who would have been inclined to, again, see a mediocre version of a Lord of the Rings television show. I find that truly fascinating. And again, I'm not sure what the intentions are. Obviously, I don't know them personally, and I don't know the inner workings of Amazon. Nevertheless, if their intention is to dramatically subvert Lord of the Rings, i.e., taking the very medieval Catholic premise of Lord of the Rings, or even this mythological conception of the matter of Middle-earth, this idea of a mythology for England, and completely turning on its head and trying to make it, quote unquote, less problematic, less European-centric, etc., then you need to have the audience there already in order to subvert them. So I find it remarkable that their first response is to alienate the audience before they've even had a chance to see the series. I really don't know what's going on there.
Well, the older I get, the truer I find the words of Erich von König the Dean, who was I'm sure you know, the Austrian writer and historian, commentator. He pointed out that most historians will accept the fact that there are 2 major factors in human events: conspiracy and catastrophe. And the big argument is always how much of the one versus the other was there in this or that given historic event. He says the problem with that is that it leaves out the third and equally important factor in human affairs, and that is stupidity. And it wasn't being funny. There is an element of stupid in our makeup, a gift from the fall. And when you combine ignorance and arrogance, you get stupid. However, you'll be happy to know that this duo did have one other important thing other than Star Trek. they updated the Disneyland Jungle Cruise to make it less offensive and problematic and so on. So what? That's an important something or other. I mean, isn't it?
Supposedly. McKay is the other.
Patrick McKay and J.D. Payne. Patrick McKay was also the name of a serial killer in England, but I don't think they're the same person.
Well, I think it may be appropriate.
Yeah, a prequel. Well, why not? Let's break down all the barriers. But I really, I don't know what's going to come out of this, but I can only hope, frankly, that they lose their shirt on it, because it may force them to think differently the next time they've got a bright idea. I've got an idea. Anne of Green Gables, only instead of Prince Edward Island, it'll be in Hawaii, set in the 1990s, and she's trying to unionize the sugarcane workers. You know what? No. No, Rings of Power didn't do too well. And I don't think Aloha Anne is going to do well.
See, I'm much more cynical than that. I mean, they've been doing this marketing strategy of preemptively turning the audience against the intellectual property and labeling them anything, racists, misogynists, what have you. And they've been doing it for how long? 6 years? Longer? 7 years?
Longer. A decade.
Forever.
And they continuously lose money. These things don't make any money, and yet they keep using the same marketing strategy over and over and over again. So I don't think it is going to be a matter of them looking at this, Rings of Power fiasco. I mean, the one bit of schadenfreude one can get out of this is because they have invested so much money in this, and the fact that they, I think, are sort of put down for 5 seasons is just seeing the viewing figures, if nothing else. A little ray of sunshine as this whole sort of debacle progresses. But yes, I mean, I think the best sort of way we can sort of deal with this, because I don't think any of us are under the assumption that this is going to be good. I mean, I have no intention of watching it. I'll be fascinated maybe to watch one episode out of morbid curiosity. But apart from that, I would just advise people to ignore it. And if they have to interact with it, just ridicule it. I mean, this sort of thing does deserve as much ridicule as it possibly, as it justly deserves. And I think, sadly, there's one thing which we haven't alluded to, which is the unfortunate passing of Christopher Tolkien. Because Christopher Tolkien, of course,
definitely,
in addition, to editing and publishing the Silmarillion 4 years after Ronald Tolkien died this was in 1977. We are indebted to him for also publishing the history of Middle-earth and, of course, Fall of Gondolin, Beren and Luthien, The Children of Húrin, and many things which are invaluable to people who study Tolkien. And from what I gather, the Tolkien estate, with him as the literary executor, had a total veto on creative decisions undertaken by Amazon. I think they were given the rights in 2017. And Christopher Tolkien still possessed that veto. And of course, with his passing, there is no keeper of the flame, so to speak, to ensure that this madness doesn't happen, which is very unfortunate for the rest of us. But that's what it is. I mean, sadly, Christopher Tolkien, he let the Lord of the Rings happen. I enjoy Lord of the Rings. I thoroughly enjoy Lord of the Rings for what it's worth. I didn't enjoy The Hobbit. And as you mentioned, Charles, I wouldn't necessarily call the dwarf, what was her name, Tariel, I think, the dwarf elf love triangle with Legolas woke, but I would call it nonsense. It is just indicative of a cynical, the cynical sort of Hollywood structure to create something like that. Oh, we can't just have these dwarves coming and finding a gem in this mountain. There has to be a romance story that plug in a little bit, why not? But that was tame compared to what I anticipate we're going to get with this.
Well, this is true. And of course, too, Christopher, you know, I have to say he did an extraordinary job. A good friend of mine, the late and much lamented Glenn Goodnight, met with him in '75 and found out the plans for the Silmarillion were going ahead. But he asked him, did your father leave much in the way of unpublished material? And apparently Christopher just laughed. He said, you have no idea how much there is. He said, but there's a lot to come. And sure enough, there was. And I well remember the anticipation with which we looked forward to the publication of the Silmarillion. And when it finally came out, all the many questions it answered and all the many new ones it opened up. It was a great thing. And Christopher, as you say, with him gone, there's no one to really to protect the legacy from the vultures. But having said that, we certainly have an awful lot in print, and all I can say is you've got to stick to it and do that old-fashioned thing they call reading.
Yeah, hopefully it will bring everyone back to reading the books. Maybe that's the providential element of this show. But also, yeah, Christopher, my understanding is after Christopher died, Amazon reshot a lot of what they had previously shot. And so it seems like, it's sad to say, but it seems like even the Tolkien estate, without Christopher, doesn't seem to have as big of, a gripe with basically destroying the material in sacrifice for monies. And also I'm back and forth in my head. Like, am I gonna watch it? Am I gonna watch the show just to like do shows on how terrible it is? Am I going to take that route? Like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do in the end about that. It definitely deserves ridicule, but I'm not really sure if I should watch it. So
I tell you, honestly, I've only got so much time in any given day. The time I spend on TV, which I would include this as TV, I want to invest wisely. I don't want to waste it. We've got too many other things going on. One of the things that I found very amusing is that for both the BBC and CBS, apparently a major hit that was unexpected is this series Ghosts, which has both a British and American version. It's probably the least woke thing on television. It's got a touch of wokery, but not nearly as much as the rest. And oddly enough, everyone's surprised both versions have done very well. As soon as someone comes up with an alternate means of providing decent viewing content that's not woke, that is entertainment and enjoyable, that individual will make a ton of money. It will clean up. Can you imagine, with all the technology we have today, what could be done with some of our great works of literary art?
I think that's why I find this so depressing, though, because when I look at this, I just imagine money just burning in front of me, like that scene. What was it in The Dark Knight with Heath Ledger?
Yeah, it's true, and it's a pain. And of course, there really is only so much money around, and to see it wasted on this kind of garbage is annoying. But who knows? Nothing lasts forever, and even the reign of the woke will have to pass eventually. I don't know how or why, but pass it must.
Yeah. Also, Hollywood is just notorious to doing films or shows that they pour money into, but there's always only specific movies, I think, that they actually want to succeed, because the ones that they want to do would never succeed, because they're going to destroy it. They're going to make it, really just boring. That's why you don't ever know what the movies are that get big awards and stuff. But then they have to at some point make movies or shows that actually do make money, so then they can start making the crap again.
The sad thing, gentlemen, the sad thing. But on a happier note, we still have the books.
Absolutely. I think what I found so frustrating about this, when I heard about this, I became very excited, and then immediately it dampened, and I became incredibly cautious and reserved about it, because unlike Lord of the Rings, where we do have the books, we have 3 wonderful books. With this, we have, a vast tome in the form, if you're willing to wade for it, all of the extended lore, which, has been alluded to, Christopher Tolkien unearthed and provided for us and was able to chronicle for us. But even for readers of the Silmarillion is still quite fragmentary. It's in no way similar, because of course it's not a completed work, to the Lord of the Rings. If anything, I think a lot of people read the Silmarillion just to get information on the universe of the Third Age, of the Lord of the Rings in particular.
Oh.
So I think what is remarkable about this is it could have been a wonderful opportunity to do something really creative and delving in to all of the extended literature around the Legendarium, looking into the unfinished tales, looking through the history of Middle-earth, and unearthing every little piece, fragment, which they could use to try and create something which was in the spirit of Tolkien, and immersing audiences in the lore, which, let's face it, very few people are going to read anything even beyond the Silmarillion. The Silmarillion, very few people have read even the Lord of the Rings books, let alone the Silmarillion. So in that way, I do think it is a bit of a tragedy that, unlike Lord of the Rings, where we do have the books, this is a period of time in Tolkien lore which very few people know anything about, the Second Age. And this is going to squander that opportunity. I'm not sure whether an opportunity will present itself. I mean, one of the things that got me excited on hearing this Lord of the Rings series was that eminent Tolkien scholar and author of the Road to Middle-earth and author of the Century, Tom Shippey, was going to be an advisor on the series. But of course, he was also unceremoniously dismissed at some point, I think, for holding an interview without prior approval, or some petty reason other than that. So once you've gotten rid of the people who really understand the extent of the literature, and you replace them with these people who don't care, who are just going to liberally create their own characters to conform with these modern woke archetypes, it does seem almost worse in that way, because the works are obscure enough as they are. And so the way most people are now going to receive the Second Age, if this is watched at all, is through this act of woke vandalism, which is really quite demoralizing, but there you are.
Woke
Sad,
vandalism.
but true.
I like that name, woke vandalism.
Woke vandalism, wow.
Sums it up pretty well. It's interesting to me, sort of the Joseph Pierce article on the Lord of the Ring, or the Rings of Power, I should say, was very interesting, because it brought up the idea of multiculturalism. And there's 2 different types of what he sort of defines multiculturalism. One, as in the fact that elves are elves, dwarves are dwarves, men are men. They have, like, there's even some, some cultures within those, because there are different kind of types of elves and types of dwarves and types of men. Yeah. But then they want, like, but then there's other multiculturalism that they're adding, which they're just trying to make everyone have cultures within cultures, so that there is no such thing as a culture of men or a culture of elves.
No, everything has to resemble 21st century America. It doesn't matter what culture you are, whether it's you're talking about dwarves, whether you talk about elves, whether you talk about men. I mean, men is the only, I mean, even hobbits. There was this one line alluding to one branch of the hobbits having darker skin than the others. Therefore, they're going to be black. I mean, the ridiculous thing about this, if you have to do this, if you have some sort of creative mandate and you're forced to work within these confines, within the race of men, of course, you have the men of Harad, you have the Easterlings. It's not all just white Western men, that archetype, whatever ridiculous thing you're going to impose on this. Yet they can't just stop at men, they have to subvert everything. So the elves are going to be, again, representative of 21st century America. The hobbits are going to be, even though the hobbits are supposed to be this quintessential archetype of, you know, the English countryside, they are going to be, and again, in that respect, they're rather anachronistic to the whole work, but that's neither here nor there. They're supposed to represent this idyllic aspect of the English countryside. Of course, that definitely needs to be subverted.
There'll be sharecroppers. Basically, Saruman will have already won when the show opens.
Mm.
I mean, they'll already be Sharky's slaves.
Well, I'm wondering where when the genocide happened, Charles. I'm wondering how we get to the situation in the second age to where we get to this situation in the third age. I'm curious. Maybe that's going to be the plot. Maybe that's going to be the entire plot for this new series.
It could be the Falahides, who we remember were the blonde hobbits, slaughter the Stoors, who were the darker, shorter hobbits. So of course they're black in our version, and they enslaved them, and they worked. And Buckland is basically the Georgia of Gone with the Wind, and you've got sort of a Hobbit, Scarlett O'Hara, set against the blah 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 blah. I mean, it is all so stupid. I have a confession to make. In this past week, I've seen a Disney film that I have never seen in my entire life, a live action Disney film, Song of the South, the movie version of Uncle Remus's Tales, set in Georgia. The story is told by a black man in the post-Civil War South on a plantation. I have never seen this film. It came out in 1946. I grew up singing some of its songs, but we weren't allowed to see it. And I've got to tell you something horrible. It's a fun film. It's really, really good. But I can see why it upsets and annoys. The idea, you see, with wokery, at the end of the day, everything is about envy and hate and power. If somebody isn't obviously in charge, then they're enslaved. The subtleties of real life that people play their part, but it's not always what it appears to be. That's lost on them. The human condition itself, with all its strangeness and multiplicity, is lost on the woke. They can't understand it. They try to remake it into easily bite-sized chunks. I mean, that's why earlier you were referring to the problem with femininity, really, the problem with quote-unquote gender stereotypes. Those are really gender realities. And the reason why they're so difficult for the woke person is precisely because they're so complex. And the woke person can't really handle the complex texture of human life. It's just too much.
It is too much for them because they don't understand that men and women are different.
Sorry.
The It reminds me a lot of a actually modern fantasy novel that I recently read by Andrew Clavin. I don't know if any of you have heard of his recent series, Another Kingdom. I'm reading, it's the third book at the moment. But there's a part when there's literally a society or a town or a country or whatever where they've basically destroyed all women. They've basically killed all women, and they've dressed these weird, or the men, they've dressed them up as women, and that is basically all their society remains in. And it's supposed to be sort of, an analogy to how we're attacking femininity these days.
Well, we certainly are. But luckily, we're attacking masculinity too. You see, if men are men, it's toxic masculinity. And if women are women, they're oppressed.
That's how just it goes. I mean, someone has to be oppressed and someone has to be the oppressor. And even when you're able to just yell at someone that they're an oppressor, that totally means that they're an oppressor and you're oppressed, not like the other way around.
Well, one thing history teaches us is that real freedom is the freedom to oppress others. That's why whenever a country becomes independent, the first thing you establish is which ethnic group will oppress all the others, because that's what freedom is about.
Can we vote on that?
Once. One man, one vote, once.
Okay. Also, is Amazon Sauron, basically? Because they have created the Rings of Power, in show form.
Mount Doom. I guess you'd have to say that because Sauron made them in Mount Doom. So you'll have to suppose that Amazon is really Mount Doom. And what's his face? Bemo or Beppo or whatever his face is.
Bezos, yeah.
Yeah, Bezos. Beppo, he could have been a Marx speller. Bezos, he I guess gets to be Sauron.
Well, I think in fairness to Sauron here, at least Sauron can, before the version we have in the Third Age, at least he can assume a pleasing shape. At least he is Anatar, the giver of gifts. I mean, from Amazon's point of view, it seems that they've completely obliterated any sort of seductive quality that Sauron could possibly have. Instead, we are presented with the ugly corruption right up front. So there's no seduction to take place in order for the Second Age, Charles, the whole sort of destruction of Numenor. Again, I'm wondering how much they're going to sort of lean into this whole possibility of Sauron's backstory and Sauron being a tragic anti-hero. That could be quite interesting, an angle to pursue. Because
one can see it. He's misunderstood. He was loyal to Morgoth, and then his side lost. He's basically a romantic figure. Although I don't know if they want to get rid of the pleasing shape that vanished with Numenor, because Numenor hasn't fallen yet, has it?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, my assumption was, the first thing I heard about the series was that the pilot was going to be the destruction of Numenor, in which case we wouldn't see that side of Sauron. But recently, again, I could be entirely wrong. We could all be entirely wrong when the series comes out, I believe at the beginning of September. But I believe they are going to try and condense the entire Second Age into one sort of lifetime narrative, or even shorter than that. I'm not sure how that's possible, but there you have it. So in which case, I have no idea when the destruction of Numenor is going to take place within that chronology.
Or what we'll see with Sauron. Oh, boy.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I really don't, it's hard to fathom what they're actually trying to plan, because it just seems like, well, the only thing that the trailer really shows is just people doing things that aren't specific. It's just the most generic trailer you could possibly have.
Yes, but what does it remind you of? It reminds you of what was it? The first that Star Wars film, the one they just brought out, The Force Awakens. It's something which even the dialogue, it sounds very similar. I think that you zoom in first on two female hobbits. We don't know who these characters are. I believe they are invented by the showrunners. And I think they say something like, "Can you feel it?" or something. And that is very similar to it within this first Star Wars trailer, where they say there has been an awakening. Can you feel it? And in a very similar manner, both trailers tell you absolutely nothing. They show you all of these disconnected images, which could mean anything, and they could mean nothing. And of course, who is the creative force behind that film? It was J.J. Abrams. And I believe J.J. Abrams is the reason why these two showrunners have their job. So we are seeing one creator who is making a bastardized imitation of a previous work, and we are seeing his lackeys trying to create a bastard imitation of the bastard imitation. So that's interesting to look at in that way.
Yeah. It's interesting also just because the thing that made me most annoyed was that it said before the time of the king. Like,
Oh, yeah.
There has been a king pretty much the entire time.
But that's what tells you the contempt they have for the audience. They believe the only king the audience has ever been accustomed to is Elisar, it's Aragorn. So they obviously don't believe the audience knows that there were kings in Gondor, let alone that Gondor comes after this period, not during this period or before this period. And that, I mean, how do you define king? If you're going to define Manwë, then there has never ceased, that kingship has never, ceased. Obviously, Eru Ilúvatar, you can refer to as king, but explicitly Manwë is referenced to be a king. I'm assuming they're going to have Ar-Pharazôn in there and the other Númenórean kings. They're going to have Elendil. So I have no idea what they mean by that. Again, to me, it just indicates a complete misunderstanding and possible contempt for their audience, because that phrase is in and of itself meaningless. I mean, what are they going to do? Are they going to suddenly imagine that, elven kind has had no king up until that point? I mean, I can't.
Elwë, or Ingwe rather, is the high king of all the elves from the very beginning.
Absolutely. So I just wonder, but of course, this is the first stage. So, or even before then, the years of trees. So what are we going to do? I mean, what are they saying? I mean, I think the whole thing is just nonsense. And I think this may, if nothing else, it may betray their own contempt for their audience, but it might also betray their complete misunderstanding of the material they've been handed as well.
Well, it's true. And, what's really sad is that sometimes you can add to material judiciously and encompass the spirit of it very, very well. So, for instance, if you remember, to use the Jackson film, you remember when Boromir was dying, he, as he's dying, he says to Aragorn, "My comrade, my brother, my king." Now, that's nowhere in the books, of course, but it did epitomize what the relationship of Boromir was to Aragorn at the very end, when he had accepted him as the rightful heir.
I'm glad you bring that up, Charles. I would say that's actually probably the best part that the movies add, in my opinion. It really drives home Boromir's sort of conversion at the end.
Yeah, he does convert at the end, which speaks well for him, of course. But I really, well, I don't know, gentlemen. It suffice to say that Lord of the Rings, like all the rest of our English language literature, is under siege right now. It's funny, today that we're talking the 27th of February, still Austrian time, is the birthday of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who was probably the first greatly known American poet. And he wrote all sorts of stuff. He was very, very well known. Well, I was looking at his Wikipedia article today, and it pointed out, yes, Wikipedia is source of all truth, we know, but it pointed out that he has been criticized for two things. One, imitating European styles. Now, mind you, he's writing in the first part of the 19th century when he starts writing. What else was there? And secondly, he's attacked for writing for the masses.
Who else do you write for?
Well, you see, this is precisely the point and why I bring it up. It's the idea that literature is not really for the masses, but only for a certain elite. Now, it could be that our friends at Amazon are thinking of remaking the Lord of the Rings in a more elite way, you know, that only the real knowers will understand. A sort of faux Gnosticism, if you like.
Yeah, especially I think I mentioned this to AM before, but the fact that they aren't, since they don't have the material for the first and second age, really. I mean, they have some, but not much. And then they decide, oh, we're not going to tell the story. Like they could start with The Hobbit and go all the way through Lord of the Rings and do it like a TV show. Like, I mean, that's kind of what I would have presumed they would do with the material they have. If you're going to make a TV series, just draw everything out so that you get literally everything in the books onto screen. But they know that they won't do it very well. They know they can't do it very well.
No.
Because if they did it well, they would have to be able to match Jackson or do it differently enough where people aren't constantly thinking back to Jackson or complaining about how it's not as good as Jackson. But they can't make something that is worthwhile. I mean, I don't know if any of you have seen, like, people have been responding to this with, evil cannot create, it can only
destroy.
pervert. Yeah.
Well, it may be that this will go down in history as proof of the dictum. Instead of merely elves being turned to orcs and ents to trolls, the whole bloody thing, all Middle Earth turned into Mordor.
This is what becomes of men.
Yeah, this is what they become woke screenwriters. Oh, that's sad.
It's an interesting point you bring up, Connor, because if the intention is nefarious, malicious, if the intention is to deliberately subvert Tolkien, as many of these elitist leftist writers would like, and in order to destroy that market appeal, but also de-emphasize the toxic aspect, so to speak, of Tolkien, logically, then one would want to tear down the characters in Jackson's trilogy. One would want to tear down the Hobbits. One would want to tear down Aragorn. One would want to tear down Legolas.
Yeah.
One would want to effeminize these characters, make them useless, bring in new characters who are wonderfully diverse, who can correct them, who can explain to them all of their misdeeds, et cetera, and could do everything just so much better than all of these legacy characters. And then, of course, the new series will be them. They will be the ones carrying the fate of Middle Earth on their shoulders, and all of these throwbacks will be cast onto the ash heap of history as, is their just desserts. That is why I was surprised that they were going for a prequel so far in the past, because of course most of the characters are dead. The only characters who will be alive at that time are the elves and the primordial beings. And so I find it remarkable in that sense. I almost think it's almost a misstep if you're going to intentionally subvert this, because what characters are you left to subvert? Well, Elrond is around, Galadriel is around, even the Astari. Even Gandalf. Gandalf still exists as a Lorien, as a Maiar, but he doesn't have a form which is recognizable to the audience, as with the other Astari. So I find it, and apparently they are making a cameo appearance at one point, so maybe they will be trying to subvert these characters as well. Maybe a Lauren will be a woman, because gender is something which the Maya and the Ainur can adopt, for rather the Valar, sorry, they can adopt gender. So maybe they're going to present us with a female Gandalf. That's one possibility. But it's just interesting how they did pick a period which is so far in the past, so as to possibly limit the damage of people's nostalgia for the Peter Jackson trilogy. And I wonder why that is. And I do wonder, possibly, is it because it's too soon, since not only the Peter Jackson trilogy, but also the Hobbit films, that people will just dismiss it. So I think on all levels, they're even failing at the attempt at subversion here in their endless stupidity, which is really quite remarkable.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, my theory behind why they can't subvert the Jackson films is because I think it might be job security in Hollywood. If they attack Peter Jackson's work, Peter Jackson already is the top dog regarding such things. They won't be able to survive in Hollywood. It's different with like Star Wars, when you can subvert everything, because George Lucas was out basically of Hollywood, and he had already, his whole career was all about like taking things away from Hollywood. So, you know, but Peter Jackson was sort of, you know, his own, like one of the only people in Hollywood that had created something that would be appreciated. And it was even appreciated at an awards level. They won all the awards. There's nowhere they're going to attack such a thing so recently with a person who probably has way more power than they do. Even maybe you could argue Bezos has power, but he has only power in the sense of money, not as in the same, you know, in the same vein as Jackson. So I think there's something about Jackson's films that are untouchable, and the only way you can subvert everything is by going back. And, you know, it's sort of like how terrible historians want to completely change your understanding of history and want to basically tell lies to disfigure history, and then you don't even know what happened in the world, and then you have a complete terrible understanding of yourself too. You don't understand yourself if you don't understand history. So they won't understand Lord of the Rings or anything related to Tolkien if you disfigure the past for them.
And as AM put it very well, it's most people aren't going to go back to read all the other stuff. And it'll be very unfortunate if they come away with this stuff in their heads as the background. But with any luck, it'll collapse of its own weight.
Yes, I think hopefully that will be the case. But I also think, you know, the human spirit is very interesting in regards to like going back to do research, because I feel like the same could be said with like the the problems within the Catholic Church today, as all three of us are members. I would say that, you know, people looking into what was done prior to, you know, the Novus Ordo, and seeing that, and then trying to figure out the, you know, sort of a way to bring that back, to bring tradition back more vividly for everyone. And I think we could see a return just like that to Tolkien readers. I think if they see this as garbage, like, it's one thing if they think, oh, this is so amazing, and it's another thing if they think it's garbage. If they think it's garbage, we might have more Silmarillion readers than we've ever had.
Well, one could hope. And the other thing you have to bear in mind, too, is that the books do have a great deal of strength of their own, a great deal of power of their own, which is what made them popular in the first place. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the counterculture people were really attracted by them. and you'd see Frodo Lives T-shirts, and Come to Middle Earth posters and head shops. I mean, and you would look at that. Tolkien himself was amazed, shall we say, by a lot of his fans, but he came to realize, as he put it in a letter, he talked about the counterculture of the youth of that time, and he said, however, it's not all the fainéance and filth. There's also a yearning, an anti-drabness, a yearning for cavaliers. And that's part of the human spirit. It'll never go away. And however it gets stepped on, it will always return.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most hopeful way that we could frame that. And I think it's probably a good place to end our conversation. You guys have been great, guests, and I really appreciate both of you coming on. If you guys want to plug anything or say a goodbye to our audience, Charles, would you like to start?
Well, sure. You can catch me tomorrow on Monday, the latest off the menu at the Tumblr House channel on YouTube. Also, my not so new book anymore came out last year. Blessed Emperor Charles, The Legacy of a Holy Emperor, is, I can't help pushing it because this is his centennial year. And I'll be going to Madeira for the anniversary of his death, April 1st, the centennial. And now more than ever, I mean, you talk about a Tolkien-esque figure. Blessed Charles certainly was one. And now more than ever, we need his intercession. So find out about him and start praying to him.
Am?
Yes, other than thanking you for letting me come on, it's been a wonderful chat. Nothing in general, but in order to relate this back to the topic of tonight's conversation, I'm currently arranging for a rather long-term series. It's called Ardoranye, which means the Kingdom of Arda, where I'm going over chronological periods in the history of Middle-earth. And it's not a law thing, because there are plenty of channels which have dealt with the law ad nauseum. So I don't really want to do that, but I really want to get at the underlying sort of influences, inspirations, and the spirit of everything Tolkien was trying to get at. So the first episode was covering what Tolkien was trying to achieve as per the matter of Middle-earth. Was it a mythology for England? The second episode was dealing with Tolkien's cosmogonical myth, the creation myth, the Ainur Lindale, the music of the Ainur. And on Friday, I will be having another discussion focusing on what I've called Tolkien's Paradise Lost, focusing on elements of the fall in the first few chapters of the Silmarillion, starting off with the Battle of Powers and the destruction of the lamps, and ending with the kinslaying and the flight of the Noldor. So yes, if people want something which hopefully will serve as some sort of antithesis to what we're all expecting with the Lord of the Rings series on Amazon, do please go and check that out.
Yes, everyone should. Is a great series, and all of your stuff, Apostolic Majesty, everything he has and his channel is wonderful. And if you're looking for more in-depth conversations about history, check that out. And please, everyone, if you like what I'm doing here at Plotlines, please like, share, and subscribe, and have a wonderful day. Bye.